right. All right, Ariel, we did it. I want to just make sure. Okay, I want to start by thanking you, Ariel, for organizing this and for getting me through how to actually share. I'm sorry, the presentation should say echo without the E. Um, so thank you again to Pain BC and particularly to you, Ariel. I also want to do a land acknowledgement. I am speaking to you from the lands of the Lekwungen people. I'm on West Saanich territory where I am an uninvited but very grateful visitor. I also want to acknowledge that it is the Black Awareness Month, and I think what we are going to do today will, in a small way, contribute to increasing our understanding of the lives that people who are identified as Black live here in Canada. Okay, so I am afraid I can't see you, which is a bit tough for me because as a professor, I'm very used to reading your faces, seeing how you are doing, but hopefully we're all doing well. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next slide, and it's not actually, let me see how I can do this. Here we are. Okay, so the topic for today is it's actually I'll speak in more detail about it in a minute, but it is about analyzing it's about a field study that we undertook, a bunch of us, in which Pain BC was a equal and willing partner, where we asked three groups of socially marginalized people: LGBTQTS plus, refugee newcomer populations, as well as Indigenous people, about their experiences of living with chronic pain. We also asked them what would be supportive to you while living in pain. And so really a very basic focus group study. And we took what is a phenomenological view or methodology of understanding pain. So let me just go to the next slide, because I actually explained the phenomenological methodology more in the next slide. So this was our team. We don't look as nice as these people, by the way. It's just an image. But we had Ken, Colleen, Bruce, Cindy, Greg, and Marie, who are from Pain BC, and myself as a part of the research team. Phenomenology of pain. So what is that? It's the idea that pain as an experience has a meaning to it, and that the meaning of pain is constituted within one's experience of pain. So phenomenology is interested in the meaning of experience. So we asked this a bunch of people, what is your experience of chronic pain, as a way of understanding the meaning that they were making of pain. Now, this is unlike other ways of looking at pain. The dominant way of looking at pain is the medical model through which we understand pain. And that does not understand pain as an experience or tries to find meaning. What that does is it looks at the objective phenomena of pain, the biology of pain, and it examines the body to discover where the pain occurs and how to cure it or how to address it in a biological sense. So it's really quite a different way of looking at pain. And I really want to emphasize that what we were doing was quite different. when phenomenologists look at pain, as we were, we actually challenge this body-mind split that is more predominant within a medical model of pain. So the medical model of pain would say the body is where the pain occurs. And we're just going to look at the body to understand where it is and how it can be addressed. The mind has very little to do with it. There is this split, and it's called the Cartesian split. Descartes, who was a philosopher, famously said, "I think, therefore I am." So the idea is that people are because they think. Their body has very little to do with their mind. So there's the idea of that split, and this is how a medical model of pain would also look at pain. They would say, the mind has very little to do with it. Let's look at the body. It's an objective way of garnering knowledge, if you like. We were challenging that. We were saying there is no mind-body split. Pain is an experience. It's as much mental as it's physical, as it's psychological, as it's sociological, as it's political. That was the main point. We also added and actually centered another level to our analysis of pain, and that was looking at it within a decolonial context. And decolonial context actually is also very phenomenological in nature. So we had an agreement, if you like, a merging of points of views. But we centered the decolonial analysis in understanding experiences of pain. Now, both phenomenologists as well as decolonialists agree that the body is central to our understanding of pain. It's very body-centered. But unlike the medical model, which begins with the body and ends with the body, the phenomenological model as well as the decolonial model actually sees the body as, if you like, a window to the mind, to society, to politics, as I said earlier. It does, so it looks at the body in a non-dualistic, non-binary way. And what it does, it says, what is the experience of pain on the colonial body? How is it different? How do we make meaning of pain differently if we were looking at, say, a white body, or if we were looking at a trans body? What then is the sociological, political context of colonization's role in understanding the experiences of pain? So this is really important to me that you get this, because the rest of what follows, the heart of it is this. So the idea is that the body in phenomenology, I'm not going to keep saying phenomenology, the body in decolonial analysis is a window to the world. It is a way of being and doing and thinking. The body does, but it also thinks, because the body is an experience. It experiences things. It has emotions. It is not just a biological thing. It's not just a biological entity. That's really important. So we were looking at how does colonization feature into experiences of pain on the colonial body. And the colonial bodies that we chose to look at were Indigenous peoples and refugee newcomers. Okay. So how did we then organize our field study? What we said was, actually, to be honest, this is nice when I say it in a presentation, but the fact is we hadn't thought about this concept of encounter. It came about from the narratives. What we said to the participants was, tell us about your experiences of pain and what are the ways in which we can support it. What they talked about was certainly their experiences of pain, but through often their analysis of their encounters with healthcare workers. This is where the experiences of pain came alive. So I'm just going to take a sip of water. So when talking about and analyzing their narratives, we understood that a central concept of the colonial analysis, but also of participant narratives, because they were the colonial subjects, was this notion of encounter. How is their body read in the encounters with the healthcare system? And so we are actually going to present our analysis here in the presentation, but even in a paper we are presently writing, by looking at what is the nature of that embodied encounter between the colonial body and the healthcare system, particularly healthcare workers. Now, Sarah Ahmed, who is a post-colonial thinker, defined encounter in this way. She said that the encounter with the other is a relationship between strangers, embodiment, and community. Community here will stand for the healthcare system, embodiment for the body of the participants, talking about this encounter, and stranger is the mediating influence or the medium between that encounter of the embodied racialized body and the healthcare system. And what she said here is, which is very important, is the stranger is simply anybody or anybody we do not recognize. Instead, so we call them strangers because we don't recognize them, but they are always socially constructed as somebody we already know. What she meant by that is encounters are always mediated by stereotypes. The newcomer, refugee, racialized body may appear as a stranger to a doctor in Canada who is, not often been encountering the refugee body, but the doctor encounters that refugee body not as a stranger, but with the stereotypes and the biases and the images that are always already present in anyone about this stranger. So this is what we wanted to look at. What is that encounter like? But the encounter is with a stranger who is not a stranger, if you know what I mean. We can talk more about this in the question session. So the purpose of the study then was to explore first-person accounts of racialized people, and by this I mean Indigenous and newcomer refugees people. I use the term, by the way, refugee newcomer always together, because refugees have often said they do not want to be labeled as refugees. They want to be called refugee newcomers. So those two, to look at their accounts of their embodied experiences of encounters with the healthcare system, particularly healthcare workers, and the meanings of pain that emerged as a result of these encounters. So while our study was much broader, we had looked at 3 groups, I'm only going to examine these 2, the narratives of these 2. So we did a thematic analysis of the narratives of these encounters. And the first theme that emerged was the body as knowledgeable. Now I'm just going to, it would be great if somebody could read this, but I can't see you, so I shall read it. This is the narrative of a refugee newcomer. And it is colloquial because we are basically not changing her voice. This is her voice. For 6 years, I was always tired. I can't do anything normal. So I told this to the doctor, and he said, there is nothing wrong with your health. So I accepted it. One day, it took me like 1 week to get over a headache. I had a very strong headache, and I was slowing down and everything. I felt nothing normal again. So I told myself I need to go to emergency. So this is after 6 years. So when I went there, I told them that I have a strong headache, and I showed them the place exactly, gesturing at her head. And I told them that I need help because I can't manage all this pain. The doctor, he didn't believe me at first. So, she had not been believed for 6 years, so he didn't believe her again. He told me, you just have a migraine. I told him, no, it's not that. I feel something in my brain. It pushes my brain away. And I still remember her trying to show that, she felt like something was pushing. But he didn't believe that. He said, I feel, he just feels that I'm faking it. Yeah. And then my husband told him, can you please do a CT scan, something better to know what she has? When they do the CT scan, they found the tumor that took all of the right side of my head. So then the doctor, he apologized and he told my husband, thank you, because you asked us to do the MRI, because if we didn't do that, after 1 hour, she would have died of stroke. Sorry, I have a... Okay, then, so that was the refugee newcomer. This is an Indigenous woman talking. I had back surgery a long time ago. It is pushing 20 years since I had it. And I told them then, listen to me and don't do what you're going to do. They wanted to put those rods in my back. And I told them, natives tend to reject those rods. So I don't want to go through with that. They wouldn't listen to me. They cut me from the top of my butt to the base of my neck, wide open. And they put those rods in with 9 different bolts. And the head of them is about the size of a blue jean snap. And they had those secured in 9 different spots. Well, at the 4th month, after having them in me, I started feeling my body was rejecting the steel. I went in and I told them, and they did not listen to me. They said that it was in my head, that I didn't have any pain, she didn't finish her, but basically they didn't believe she was in pain in the 4th month after the surgery. And they told her I was just trying to get drugs. So they put those in at the year mark of them being in my body. So a year after, I was rushed to emergency in this town, which I have anonymized. That's where I lived at the time, and they had to open me up as soon as I got in there, and there was steel and pus and everything, like large amounts, because they documented it. For somebody to have 2 big jugs of liquid pus come out of them, there has got to be something that can be done before this. And where they had those bowls, it broke the bones. It ate the bones. So I've got 9 bones in my body that are gone because of this one doctor. And supposedly he was the head of spinal surgery in BC that did the surgery on me. He crippled me. It was right from the get-go when I told them, no, don't do this. Help me some other way. Okay, so this is a really, these 2 narratives are really tough I think, to process. And I think they may be for you too. And this is not about making the doctors some scapegoats or hostile beings. But what it does show in terms of experiences of pain is, first of all, it shows that the person in pain, their body knowledge is not believed. Now, a lot of studies have shown us that it didn't matter whether you were the colonial body or the other. It is a common experience of people in pain that their own knowledge about their body does not really get counted. And it goes back to what I had said to you earlier, that the medical discourse does not think that the body is a source of knowledge. Only the mind is. And only their mind is. So they are the authority on your pain. And they will find out where that pain is by looking at your body. That's really important to say. So this is the general body-mind split that the medical discourse already has. But when it comes to the colonial body, it's really important that you see that the colonial context adds an extra layer to what is commonly experienced. So the colonial theorists, along with feminist, queer theorists, etc., point out that the racialized or the gendered or the queer or the disabled body is viewed as too much body and not enough mind. So, for example, in the case of Black and brown bodies, they are viewed as too much body. Therefore, they are seen as overly sexual, aggressive, virile. These are the images and stereotypes by which racialized bodies, including Indigenous bodies, of course, are viewed. Women's bodies, for example, also have the same stereotype. They're too much body. That's why they're too emotional. They're not enough mind. They work more impulsively. They're not able to be detached observers. They're more likely to be, biased, etc. And I could go on. Queer bodies are seen as too effeminate, and therefore all kinds of judgments are made about those bodies. So being too much body means you are not enough mind in the colonized context. A very simple example, is the great liberal theory John Stuart Mills said of India. He was writing when India was colonized. He said, well, they're nice people, but they are not mentally mature. They don't know how to run a democracy. This was said of Indigenous people. This was said of all of Africa. So the knowledge that is not accepted in a white body as being knowledge has an extra layer when it's the colonized body, which is that you are so much body that you want your knowledge about anything is not knowledge. It's not something we have to take seriously. And so when we are trying to make meaning of pain, the first thing about the encounter is that the racialized body is even less likely to be believed. It is even less likely to be taken seriously. That is to say, the subject of a racialized body is even less likely. I have no idea how I'm doing for time. Ariel, you'll need to somehow tell me. I'm just going to move on. So that was the first thing that emerged. The second thing that emerged was the culturally clothed body. And I will read to you the narratives to explain what that means. So this is again the Indigenous person. I'm being very honest when I say I don't trust the doctors from this town. In March this year, I got hurt at work. I fell down slippery stairs and my sister P was with me and took me to the hospital. I was there for 4 hours screaming in pain, and they didn't give me anything for pain. They didn't do anything until about 4 or 5 hours later, and then they took 2 x-rays. And then the doctor said, oh, there's nothing wrong with you. We'll give you a morphine shot and then 1 week off work. Now, this is the same, by the way, person we had encountered earlier whose body was filled with pus. But of course, the next day will not show that. So my sister P brought me home, and to really help me. I was having such a hard time. And then she actually goes on to talk about how awful that pain was. But I was having a hard time to ask for help from any doctor because how they treat me. Like they say, you just want to get pain medication just to get a high and all that. But I am really in pain and I'm telling them, but they don't believe me. And I'm really having a hard time right now. It's hard for me to ask because of all the things I went through with these doctors before. And I don't trust these doctors. This is the town she lives in. I feel like they are murderers. I say the same thing about the nurses too. They are very prejudiced, even the receptionist. So here what I want to point out to you is the encounter between her as a patient and the medical system is filled with prejudice. It's filled with stereotypes. The pain is not taken seriously because the assumption is that you just want to get high on drugs. This is all about feeding your addictions. She was not, by the way, addicted. This is another example of a refugee newcomer talking about, we said, what is your experiences of pain? And this is what she says. Because the government that took away my kids for 15 years, no kids. I could only see them once a year for 1 hour. That's the only time they would let me visit my kids. It's hard. And it's because how the interpreter translated. All I said when I was at the psychiatrist's office is that my life is so hard that looks like it's better if I die. So she's in the psychiatrist's office because, by the way, just to give you a background, because she has chronic pain and nobody can find out why she has pain. So they decided the pain was in her mind. It was a figment of her imagination. So she's now at a psychiatrist's office. And she's trying to explain, my pain is real. I feel it so deeply that I feel like it's better to die than live with this chronic pain. But that does not mean I want to kill myself. I was just trying to say that my life was so hard. That's all. Look like I die better, right? So she's explaining to us in her English that that's all I was trying to say. Life's not easy for me. Better die better than to live. But the interpreter, they say, I want to kill myself. So the interpreter translated all these rather subtle things she was doing of trying to explain the chronic nature of pain into one word, which was, she just wants one sentence, which was she wants to kill herself. You know what? They took me, put me in an asylum for 4 years. They destroyed my life. I'm so upset. And then 4 years, but then 11 years after, they took away her 3 children to, childcare. I'm so upset. And I say, I'm not crazy. I'm normal. I'm not crazy. And I don't want to go there. But they put me in and gave me lots of pills, a whole bunch. And that's why I'm very upset. So we see this woman, she has come out of a psychiatric ward 11 years later. And she's still not able to see her children. So I'm just going to stop with these 2 narratives. What does it show? It shows the same idea of stereotypic behavior. In the first case, the woman who is indigenous is not believed because they say, "Oh, you're just doing it because you want to feed your addiction." Here, it's a more systemic problem. The translator does not know how to translate what she's saying in a way that is understandable to the doctor. So what happens is that the doctor uses a medical lens to say, well, she doesn't have any chronic pain. That's why she's in my office. She should actually be seeing another doctor who would examine her pain. That doctor can't see the pain. And by the way, it was very real pain that she had, which had gone unexamined. And so it has to be the mind. So there was an assumption made by the doctor about what this body and person was saying. And the assumption was it's all in her head. And see, she wants to kill herself. That just affirms it's all in her head. So 2 very, again, disturbing narratives of how the body is read. And Judith Butler came up with this idea that the body is never a naked body, never an objective body, never a neutral body. It is always culturally clothed. And so that's why we named the theme number 2 as culturally clothed body, because we see this body and we clothe it with our image, our stereotype of what it is we are seeing and who it is we are hearing, what we are listening into. And the final one, I have no idea of time, so
You're doing fine.
Okay, great. Okay, great. Okay, so the final one, body is active. So while I have talked to you about the huge kind of oversights that racialized bodies encounter within the healthcare system, there were also a humongous amount of narratives of just about everybody who we talked to in this focus group talked about alternate ways by which they would try to address their chronic pain. Either it was yoga, it was massage therapy, it was going to traditional sources. A lot of indigenous participants talked about traditional ways of healing that they went to because they were not getting anywhere with the medical system, etc. And so one of the things that emerged as a theme around this encounter is how active and responsive the body, the subject body of the colonized subject is. They are not simply victims. They're not simply passive in relation to this encounter. So here's a nice a quote, and it is from an Indigenous participant. And it just shows how well the Indigenous subject here is able to put herself or himself, I'm not sure about the gender of this person, or themselves, in the shoes of the doctors, which is something you find yourself wishing the doctors were able to do as well. So then here they are saying, doctors need help as well because they are not well informed about people on the street and how severe their pain is and their pain management. So doctors need to be told, not asked, which is to say, not asked, why are we in pain? They need to be told, because you can't ask somebody that don't know nothing about anything. You have to tell somebody, which is the doctors, you have to tell them about your pain and tell them how to manage it and with what painkillers, because an addict would know better about pain management than any doctor would. I had to direct my doctor in order for my pain management to be managed because she didn't understand. When I was getting the proper management, I was able to function and live. And I just thought this was just an amazing narrative to show who is really in charge. So that we're not seeing participants or clients or patients, whatever you want to call them, simply as victims. I don't have another narrative here because in terms of making sure that we are staying on time, but there were so many. There were, I would say, half the narratives about their encounter with pain was about what they were doing, what alternative ways they were doing to overcome their pain. I just want to say here that it's really important that even in decolonial work and in refugee newcomer studies, how we view refugees is so important because refugees don't want to be viewed as victims. They don't even want to be labeled just as refugees. That's why they insist on the label refugee newcomer. And they want to be viewed as survivors and for life and not as victims who ran away from a horrendous life. They want to see themselves as forward-looking and embracing life. Very important when we talk about encounters between these two beings, systems, peoples, that we always have an ear for how responsive, active, agentic the colonial body in fact is. After all, they have survived colonization in both cases, whether it's refugee newcomers or indigenous people, for centuries, right? So in terms of the discussion, so what is it that that these three themes tell us about these encounters? And what they tell us is the first thing they tell us is, if you listened in even to the little bit of the narratives that you had a chance to listen into, you can see how grave the consequences are of not being heard, of not being seen as knowledgeable. And they are grave even for non-colonial bodies who are not heard, because not being heard has very, very big consequences. In the case of the refugee woman, newcomer woman I narrated earlier, she could have had a stroke and died in a matter of an hour. In the case of the Indigenous woman, her whole body was filled with pus. She could have died of that. I mean, lives are at stake. They are at stake for anyone who is not heard. I'm not making a case of that. But how does colonization work here? How does the colonial context, mediate this? Well, it's really important to realize that colonial bodies have a lifetime of history of being seen as dispensable. That is to say, that their bodies don't matter. I mean, we are just hearing about yet another finding of graves, unmarked graves of children who died in the residential school. We hear of missing and murdered Indigenous bodies, women. We hear of refugees, new refugees who are not yet newcomers, trying to come to Europe and dying by the scores, by the hundreds, in this case, in the Mediterranean Sea, which they are trying to cross. They die as they try to overcome fortresses and barriers that are growing higher and higher as countries in the global north fortress themselves against refugees, newcomers. Their bodies don't matter. So when we talk about the encounters between the colonial bodies and the healthcare system, always remember that the context is that they already have or are familiar with the experience of being seen as dispensable. The second concept that, I'm so sorry, when I talk too much, my throat gets like that. The second concept that emerges from this encounter is the notion of the alienated body. And here again, I want to take you to a non-colonized body. You know, pain is a very, very alienating experience. You feel pain, but you're not sure exactly sometimes where it is. Sometimes you know where it is, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you're feeling it, but the cause is somewhere in other part of your body. So you go to a doctor who examines you and believes you, hopefully, and often doctors do, and examines you and tells you, actually you're feeling it here, but it is the liver that's not functioning well, but, etc. And here is the cause for why you feel pain. And then it's like you are being told by someone else why you have pain. This is just the natural course of having chronic pain. It's an alienating experience, and a lot of scholars studying pain talk about that. But we're looking at the colonial context so how does the colonial context add a layer to what is already an alienating experience? And how it does that is that you have to remember that the racialized body, Indigenous or refugee newcomer, is always being read. And it is always being read in a way that's alien to how it experiences itself, how it sees itself. So I'm trying to, let me give you a more concrete example. So I don't know if you ever read Have you ever read Audre Lorde? Audre Lorde was a poet, a Black African American poet, and she talks about this experience of being in a bus, let's say, and she's a little girl, right? And she's sitting with her mom, and the woman who is sitting next to her is a white woman, and the white woman first begins to try and edge away from this young child who is Audre Lorde. And so Audre Lorde says, I thought, oh my goodness, there must be something between me and her, maybe a mouse or an insect, and she's trying to get away from it. And then in the end, the woman just gets up and gives her a look as though, it's you I'm getting away from. And Audrey says, I remember even as an 8-year-old thinking, realizing, oh my goodness, it's me she's trying to get away from. So there is this alienation, right? She's thinking of herself as just a 8-year-old child, and then she learns to read how the other, the white gaze, reads her. So there are lots of examples of how Indigenous people are read. And then, of course, Frantz Fanon, a lot of Indigenous scholars have talked about how that reading, it gets internalized. So somebody sees you as aggressive or virile or dirty or whatever it may be, because you're brown or you're black or you're the colonial body, the colonized body. And then what happens is you internalize that of yourself. And so you have this whole phenomena, say in India, of women drinking bleach basically to make themselves look fairer, right? So you have this idea of internalizing this. So alienation, in other words, is a very real experience of colonization, of the colonial body. So when you have a situation where pain is already an alienating experience, then you need to, in the case of a racialized body, add that extra layer that the experience of alienation is very familiar. Okay. A final thing, very important, the third concept that's so important to understanding the meaning of pain in colonized bodies is that these are agentic bodies. They are bodies that are responsive. They are bodies that mitigate against the worst excesses of exclusion. So Garland, not Judy Garland, I think her name's Sarah Garland, who is a disability theorist, talks about not viewing the disabled body as merely as victims. Rather, she suggests that disabled people, and this includes people, for example, living in chronic pain, are engaged in a very dynamic encounter where they show agency in dealing with both their own personal limitations that chronic pain brings, as well as environmental limitations like doctors or healthcare workers, who they then try to find alternate ways to address their pain. So it's much more dynamic. And that is part of the meaning of pain in the lives of bodies who are colonial. They are constantly trying to address their own limitations and the limitations of the structures that are excluding them. As I said earlier, they are survivors for life and not as victims. So very quickly, recommendations for practice. I've said a lot. I hope I haven't said too much. I hope it's been clear, but here it is. Recommendations. Always take the colonial context as an important mitigating medium within which to understand the experiences of people living in pain. That's really the first recommendation. Listen to the knowledge that people in pain, that people living in pain possess. They are the experts of their experiences of pain. There is a strong connection between knowing and being. If you don't accept their knowledge, you could actually kill them. Culturally sensitive practice is not about knowing the rites and rituals and ceremonies of different different cultures. It is actually about understanding the political and historical relationship of powers between the dominant culture and those coming from racialized culture. It's much more political. So it is really about examining your own stereotypes. You could be brown and black, you, the healthcare worker. I'm not assuming you to be white, but you also have stereotypes of the other. So always examining your biases, always knowing that this encounter with this body is going to be culturally clothed. And and finally, to treat people living with chronic pain as survivors, not as victims, and to assume that you will have to work on building a relationship of trust between yourself and your client, who is the racialized client. In this case, we are looking at racialized colonial bodies, because coloniality means that trust cannot be taken for granted. And finally, to care equally for all clients by treating them as equals, not on the basis of their difference, on the basis of their difference and not in spite of it. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that presentation. It was incredibly illuminating, and I think just so moving and impactful to hear the stories that that you shared from that research. And I think just so important for everybody here to kind of take those in and really let those sink in. And we've got lots of folks posting in the chat saying thank you.
Yes.
Just thank you for all of this, and we'll try to get through a couple of questions.
Sure.
So the first one is, the person says, thank you so much for this thought-provoking research and presentation. Are there any recent examples of culturally sensitive practices that you feel really align with your findings?
It's a great question. Thank you for that. Yeah, so we did another study. Bruce Wallace and I did it, so a subgroup of us, on trauma. And we asked refugee newcomers, what is good practice? What would you say is good practice to address trauma? So pain can be traumatic. So these are sister subjects. And a lot of what they said is what I've already said. So they said things like, don't stereotype us, know who we are, know a little bit about our background. Don't assume that we will trust you. These were refugee newcomers. So they said, we have come away from a climate where authority figures are violent ones. So like the police, the doctors, they were all part of the system that pushed us out. So, don't look at us as someone who will trust you immediately. A lot of the things I put in the recommendations are true of what we have found in alternative practice. Treat us as experts. There are a lot of studies that show that people living in chronic pain, when treated as experts, actually just being listened to can allow the degree of pain to become lessened, which I think is astonishing. So if you look at my recommendations, they are themselves coming from research we did on what is good practice for people working with chronic pain.
Thank you, and maybe I'll send out the link to those articles afterwards, so folks can learn more.
Sure.
You've mentioned, so a lot of the recommendations are kind of for those individual interactions, and it sounds like that was a big focus of the research, right? Those encounters. I'm wondering if there's some recommendations that you've thought through that look at kind of systemic changes. What can we do beyond kind of those individual interactions as well to prevent these sorts of things from happening?
Another really good question. Some of the encounters do point to systemic systemic exclusions. So, for example, language is a big one. It's not enough to have an interpreter, right? The system has to ensure that the interpreters are trained to understand medical language and to translate in a way that is closer to the spirit of what's being asked or what's been said. So that was very important. The whole thing about the encounter with the stereotypes, this is systemic. And we know this to be systemic. I mean, the pandemic showed it, right? So remember the Indigenous woman who actually camera'd herself, recorded how she was treated. She died of COVID because she was treated as second class. So this is systemic. We know it to be so. So when the participant talks about their individual encounter with stereotypes in our study, we actually found that was across the board. So it's systemic. So train healthcare workers into looking at their own biases and into how to overcome those biases, because that is very important to do. Another thing that was systemic that came up, and it came up with refugee newcomers, is they just don't know the system. And the system does not teach them how to navigate the system. So there needs to be a map or a way by which an introduction to the healthcare system. So, for example, a lot of refugee newcomers said, we didn't know that there was such a thing as you first go to a doctor and then the doctor refers you to a specialist. We just didn't know that that's how it worked. We didn't know there was such a thing as an emergency where you could go when you're in chronic pain. We would take an appointment and wait for weeks because we simply are newcomers, so we don't know the system. So having a map of that system, having a way of showing who is better reviewed, like I do it all the time, right? So if I have to go to a specialist, I'll go on Google and I'll figure out who has the best reviews. But a lot of Indigenous and refugee newcomers don't do that because they don't know. They don't know how to access that information. So information by the healthcare system is extremely important. The fact that the system assumes the medical discourse to be authoritative, that it is the truth. I don't know how we get around that one, but that is structural. It's endemic to our entire healthcare system. And people who challenge it, less so now, but even now, are really laughed at, that, oh, come on, this is a science. We're talking about a science. And you are telling us to talk about emotions and take subjective experience seriously. I mean, you just don't get it. We are talking about a medical science, and we do get it. And we are not just talking about medical science. We are, but not just that. So I hope those are helpful.
Definitely. And I think we have one last question. We'll just sneak it in at the end here.
Yes.
This sounds like it's from the perspective of someone who lives with pain. Yes. So building trust takes time, and it's very difficult when you have many healthcare providers caring for you. Yes. Do you think it's beneficial to have a written bio to offer new healthcare workers so that you're not always having to tell your story over and over again and re-traumatizing yourself with this history? And just any suggestions around that?
What a great idea. I mean, I think it is absolutely essential. You know why? Because you get to be the author of who you are. You get to say who you are. A lot of our GLBTQTS plus participants really talked about that they had to educate the healthcare system about how to view them, how to see them. So we've talked about the body and how it's read and the difficulties with the reading or the misreading of the body. So yeah, absolutely. And don't just talk about who you are in terms of your bio, talk about what your pain has taught you. Insist on that knowledge being part about who you are. I think that's a great question.
Fantastic.
We've run out of time, otherwise I would say more about that.
Yeah, and we have more questions that have come in. So I hope folks will check out the research articles that you've mentioned, and will eagerly await the publication of this research that you talked about today. And in the meantime, I just want to thank everyone here for spending your lunch hour with us, and for reflecting on all of these very important topics. I'll just post in the chat before you go a link to our feedback form. Hopefully, if you can fill it out just before you you log off today, that would be great. Just lets us know what you thought of today's talk, and you can also suggest ideas for future presentations as well. And we'll also send out the recording, as I mentioned. So thank you once again, Dr. Moosa-Mitha. It was absolutely just a pleasure, and I hope everyone has a great rest of your week.
And thank you to everyone for your kind remarks. Thank you again, Ariel. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.